go!
Hey, I want to thank everybody last night on Twitter. I was there for a couple of hours, and everyone was saying, oh, my God, I love the summit. The summit is great. I was talking to my good friend, billionaire Don Coddington, just now before I came on here. And when Don Coddington says that I did something really well, the guy never gives me compliments. So he was like, man, really love that thing. And I want to say this up front today. Thank you, Andy Schreiber, because none of this would have happened without you. And I want to thank you publicly because you worked your proverbial and your actual ass off to make this whole thing.
Still got one, but
yeah, but it's diminished. Folks, give a round of applause wherever you are. If you're on the subway, if you're at your house, if you're drinking coffee, let's all just give a big old Rudy clap for making this happen. But look, it ain't over with yet. We got today to go through. We got some great speakers. Sean Baker's coming up later today. We have Nina Teichos is coming up. Eric Westman is coming up today.
Let's make another just announcement in case anybody missed that yesterday. We had a scheduling misunderstanding. So Nina Teichholz was originally scheduled to appear yesterday. Vinny and I stepped in and did our presentation we were going to do yesterday, and Nina Teichholz will now be on at 4:30 Eastern time. That's 1:30 out here in on the West Coast. And everything else is the same as the schedule. I'm going to disappear now and first I'm going to bring in Ivor Cummins.
Is he there? There he is.
And I am going to say goodbye for now, but I'll be in the background watching, and Vinny will formally introduce Ivor. See y'all later.
Thanks, Andy. Before I do that, the two people I didn't mention, also Dr. Ken Berry will be on today, and Dr. Brian Linsky. So that's the whole lineup for today. But forget about those guys right now, because this guy, we became friends years ago via internet. And then we kind of confirmed that friendship because we started running to each other all over the nation. It's almost like this love relationship. The guy literally knocked on my door in Woodland Hills one day and said, hey, we're going to video you. And we went out to Malibu. We had who do we have with us? We had
Dr. Jeff Gerber.
Dr. Gerber was there, and both Gerber and me, we have hair in our heads, but Ivor didn't, and he got a sunburn out in Malibu. But that was the first time, and then he's been on the show several times. The thing you need to know about Ivor Cummins is he was the guy that turned the whole medical community on his head when he came up with the cholesterol conundrum. And boy, was it a conundrum. And people started taking note of what this guy was talking about. He wrote a great book called Eat Rich, Live Long, along with Jeffrey Gerber, the aforementioned Jeffrey Gerber. And he's here today to lay a lot of knowledge on you guys. Without any further ado, Ivor Cummins.
Hey, thanks a lot, Vinny. Great intro. Thank you. So yeah, today, guys, great to be here, of course. Always delighted to do anything for Vinny. Of course. And today I'm not going to go through any heavy-ass science or crazy stuff. Kind of going to bring through a whirlwind tour, a bit of a reminder of some of the stuff around fat and cholesterol. And I'm actually going to touch on a few slides from my original cholesterol conundrum that Vinny mentioned there. So I'm going to go in now, if I can find the button, and see will this share properly. Application window. I ain't seeing it, guys. Okay, give me a second.
Ivor, it should be at the top there. You have should have the 6 icons.
I got it now.
Okay.
I have the slideshow. Okay, can you see that, guys?
Now we can.
Gotcha. Okay, I just got to whip it back to the start. Only take a second. So higher fat diets for heart disease, the cholesterol question, that's what I called it. And basically, there'll be some familiar material, maybe a few new studies, but hopefully it'll give an overall narrative which you will enjoy. So in Journal for the American College of Cardiology, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a paper come out. And the JACC, it's not exactly pro-fat, and anti-cholesterol hypothesis. But this paper came out, a reassessment for food-based recommendations, saturated fats and health. And the recommendation was at the end of the study that basically meat, fish and eggs and all that kind of stuff should be kind of back on the menu. And the saturated fat was not the problem we thought it was. But it was interesting to see it in JAMA, to be quite honest. And only a few years ago, we had the American Heart Association Presidential Advisory, very official from the president, in the same magazine, basically. And it said pretty much that saturated fats are still dangerous, even coconut oil. Any saturated fat is dangerous. And we were right about this all along. So things are changing and very confusing for the person in the street. So there's a video here where myself and Andy yesterday, the sound didn't really work. So I'll play it, but I'll just narrate it. So there's a very official British voice reading over this video and saying about saturated fat, that this is the amount of saturated fat the average person eats in a year. And then he follows the lady over to the sink and he said, this is what you're putting in your body, right? And he basically says, if this can do this to a kitchen sink, pipes, imagine what it's doing to your arteries. And I know many people have seen this, but the interesting thing is, I've been told that this is around 2009. So it's quite extraordinary that, like, in the new millennium, videos like this were coming out. And it's the Food Standards Agency in the UK. It's a pretty big deal. Now, this video has been taken off all websites where it was. It's been removed across the world. So it's clearly an embarrassment to them now. But luckily, I have it, either from some website or maybe I pulled it out of Vinny's movie, a documentary, I can't remember. But yeah, 2009, it was still being shown. So this thing about fat goes back a long way. And even these jokes, they go back a long, long time. You know, in a restaurant, will you have that with or without angioplasty or heart bypass type scenarios? And there was all this obsession with food and particularly fat. And it was the whole fat fears thing. So I'm going to go through a whirlwind tour of where that came from. So 61, we had this guy Keyes, and he got in Time magazine. Cholesterol was a killer, fat was a problem. We had, of course, the classic 1984 Time, where based on a kind of a trial that wasn't even a dietary trial, it was a drug trial, they came out and said cholesterol's a killer, you know, so meat and eggs were now off the menu. And then in 14, we have Time coming out saying eat butter. The experts label fat the enemy. They were wrong. So you can just imagine what the people out there, the public, what the hell are they going to think? Things are all over the place. You know, it's very confusing. So I'll just look at Keyes' 6 countries study, not the 7 countries, but the 6. And this was his original bit of confectionery. And basically, he did this correlation study, which was extremely weak, and it showed what apparently was a very strong correlation between calories from fat and deaths from heart disease. But as many of you know, there are actually around 22 countries in total, but he chose the ones he liked for whatever reason. And you wonder, why would he do this? I mean, it was the 70s. Maybe he was smoking something. I don't know. But whatever the reason, or if he was, he kept smoking it because he went on to do the 7 countries. And we know now from all the data, and you can pull it from any database. This is from Zoe Harcombe. You can see saturated fat as a percentage of energy higher all across the countries of Europe, and we have lower association with deaths from heart disease. This is males, this is females. So there's no question, but we know now the fat connection to heart disease is complete bunkum. But this guy Keyes, he was obsessed with it. And in the 1970s, he went on to do his 7 countries study. And just a reminder to people, it was men only, around 12,000 men, only 7 countries in Europe. They were cherry picked. And there was manual analysis done, and we don't even have the proper files or records of the data. And if you contrast with 2018, the PURE study, where they saw the opposite effect, and they saw lower total mortality associating with higher saturated fat in the diet, and pretty much lower cardiovascular disease mortality. This is 2017. It's men and women, 180,000 of them, 18 countries, an unbiased, non-cherry picking team, and modern technology and statistical methods. So I see people out there, often more plant-biased people, still arguing that this stuff from Keys is relevant. And a couple of years ago, they published another paper, a big one, and it went through all of this old stuff and said, no, it was correct. But it's clearly absurd. But you'll keep hearing this narrative pop up because there's a lot of reputations and a lot of politics based on it. But I think we can safely say now, without any question scientifically, that this stuff from the 70s needs to be thrown in the trash, and we shouldn't hear about it again. And I'm sorry to even have to go through it here with you today. So, heart disease and stroke statistics from Circulation Journal. This is a prestigious, the big one. And this is a huge 100-page document that I got, and it was published in 2013. But what I found interesting in it was a couple of things tucked in around page 50, right? So no one's going to read these, because this document is just like, it's like going through sticky toffee, right? You need to navigate it with a shovel. But on the page 50 or so, they had little nuggets. In the Women's Health randomized clinical trial, 50,000 women, cost an absolute fortune. Reduction of total fat consumption from 38% to around 24% had no effect on incidence of coronary heart disease, stroke, or total coronary vascular disease. So they told the truth buried in the middle. And they said this was consistent with null or useless results from 4 prior randomized clinical trials and multiple large cohort studies. So they were tucking the truth in. And I think that they were actually cleverly making sure in a few years of all this game is over, that they could claim, well, no, we said this, but they didn't advertise it. They just tucked it in. They also had this one in there, in a pooled analysis of individual data from 11 prospective cohort studies in the United States, Europe, and Israel that included 350,000 participants, approximately. Each 5% higher energy consumption of carbohydrate in place of saturated fat was associated with a 7% higher risk of coronary heart disease. In other words, 5% less or 5% more carbohydrate replacing 5% of your saturated fat, which you've lowered, associates with more heart disease. So these are very, very incredibly powerful things for them to write. But again, they hid them in the document. They just wanted to, maybe they wanted them for posterity. So, killer cholesterol, we have to touch on that one. And this bad cholesterol and good cholesterol nonsense has been going on for 40 years. I mean, the very concept that millions of years, or indeed, if you go with creation, that there would be a bad cholesterol made and a good cholesterol in our bodies. It's inherently absurd when you think about it. So the cholesterol conundrum Vinny mentioned, I did back in 2013, kind of got me a bit of attention, got me on Vinny's show for the first time. And I went through all of the LDL mechanisms, and I made a lot of colorful diagrams to try and tell this story because it was complex if you look at the scientific literature. So I had to translate it into something that everyone could see how ridiculous it was. And I also went through HDL, which is a wonder worker and does an amazing job, but I won't touch on that today. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides from that original. And there was a lot of content. It was an hour and 40 minutes long in total, Q&A, but I'm just going to touch on some of the slides. So the lipoprotein particles, LDL is a lipoprotein, and they're boats for cargo. So just to understand them, they're basically like boats or submarines. You've got triglyceride, fat energy, healthy fat energy in the middle, and cholesterol. And there's a shell around them. And basically, it just allows you to transport cholesterol and triglyceride in the bloodstream because the bloodstream is aqueous or water-based, and these fatty molecules wouldn't work very well unless they're shielded in a water-soluble shell. So that's the lipoproteins. The chylomicron, I won't really go through that one much, but the VLDL, that's the mother of LDL. So it's very low density lipoprotein. And it's produced to ferry around your body triglycerides for healthy energy from fat molecules and cholesterol. The LDL comes from that, and LDL, completely natural. Nothing wrong with it at all. The small dense LDL or glycated LDL or damaged LDL may be problematic, but I'm putting that as a different picture. Native undamaged LDL is a different thing than this. And we've got HDL, the good cholesterol, right? Everyone knows about that. So LDL species created by your liver to deliver the goods. So I'll show now the system. Your liver makes most of your cholesterol. If you eat less cholesterol, your liver will make more. And if you eat more cholesterol in your diet, your liver will make less. So really, it doesn't change things, cholesterol in the diet. And that's accepted now all over the world. Dietary cholesterol has been dropped from all guidelines. But the liver creates these VLDLs I mentioned. And these are the large LDL type boats or submarines, and they contain goods. And they've got signaling molecules that identify a VLDL as a VLDL. And they travel around the bloodstream. And the first port of call, they have to deliver triglyceride to muscle for energy, or to fat if you're storing for a rainy day, that's fine. And they deliver by docking this boat at 2 receptors, and then they can open the hull and take out triglyceride and deliver it. Perfect. Hull closes, boat moves on. And over a period when the boat shrinks by giving up triglyceride, it becomes an IDL, an intermediate density lipoprotein. And this is normal. And if that gets processed further through other processes, you will end up with an LDL. And all of this is normal and perfectly exquisite system. No problems whatsoever, no pathology, no disease. It's all good. LDL itself also can deliver cholesterol to the tissues that don't make their own. There's not many, but it has that function. And after 2 days or so, average residence time in the blood, the LDL is taken up back at the liver with receptors, and it fits these receptors very well, and it gets taken up very efficiently. So it doesn't get left along or hanging around too long to get damaged or become a problem. So this is all good, nothing wrong. However, if you damage your LDL through excessive glucose or hyperinsulinemia, or it becomes small and dense through metabolic problems, then you've got a problematic LDL. But it's not the LDL's fault, it's the root causes that drive the system to have a problem. And there's a poor uptake of these particles. They're misshapen, they don't fit the receptors, right? Quite a lot of science on this. They stay around longer. They're exposed to blood components for longer. Further damage, right? Further stripping. And by all means, these particles can partake or be part of the atherosclerosis process, which is the most common cause of heart attacks. So, but it's not the LDL's fault, right? It's the causes that break the system. That's the problem. And the biggest one, not the only one, but the biggest problem in this situation is hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance, that combination. And it's essentially undiagnosed type 2 diabetes. You may not have a diagnosis, but if you're high insulin and insulin resistant, you're de facto type 2 diabetic. So how do you properly assess the extent of heart disease? And I'm going to go a little sideways for a couple of minutes now and then come back to the cholesterol. So if you don't measure something, it don't get fixed. If you don't measure it, you can't understand it. So it's very important to be able to properly measure the extent of a problem to see what really is affecting it. So I'll introduce you to the coronary artery calcium scan, 5-minute scan, around $100 in the US, mostly don't need a doctor's note. Gives you a CAC score, coronary artery calcification. And there's many, many studies I have on this. I have a folder 4 inches thick, but they all say the same thing. So I like this one from the Mayo Clinic. And what it showed was, no matter what age you were pretty much, if you had a 0 score, your 10-year risk for heart attack was extremely low. It's never 0. You could have an electrical problem. You could have a single big atheromatous plaque, so you don't have much calcium, but it could still rupture. It's never 0 risk with a 0 score, but it's really, really low. If you have a score 1 to 100, you have nearly 5 times the risk in the next 10 years for heart attack. That's a big risk multiplier. And if you have a high score, you can have up to 20 times the risk. So hopefully you can see this measure is the best measure of heart disease and heart disease risk, because it gives a huge risk multiplier. But also, the interesting thing is, if you're a 50-year-old with a high score, you're at a very high risk. In fact, you're at a vastly higher risk than a 70 or 80-year-old who gets a 0. Now, there won't be too many who get a 0 at 70 or 80, but it really shows the power of the calcium scan that the 50-year-old with a high score is at vastly higher 10-year risk than a really old person with a low score, you know? So now we've got our powerful measure. So let's look at what happens when you actually have calcium scan results for humans, right? And you also have their LDL and their cholesterol levels. You'd be able to see if LDL or cholesterol links to heart disease extent, right? Well, this paper was fascinating, 2009, and they had all this data, and they pulled together around 20 human studies which had the calcium scan results and the LDLs, and they tracked the people over years to see what happened. And what they saw in summary was they asked 20 why questions, and every one of them was similar. For all the different studies, why did the LDL and cholesterol levels of the people not even correlate, right, with the degree of calcification and degree of disease? Very provocative. LDL didn't even correlate with the degree of heart disease. And to give you an example, one of them had familial hypercholesterolemia. Now that's the poster child for the cholesterol hypothesis, right? But the reality is with familial hypercholesterolemia, when you actually scan people and measure properly, their coronary calcium scores still don't correlate with their LDL levels. And in fact, although these guys have genetic susceptibility to heart disease as a group, when you look at them, the guys who have really early young heart attacks versus the FH guys who go much older with no problem whatsoever, they have the same LDL level. There's no difference. So this is another kind of scam to push the cholesterol nonsense. So what poorly predicts atherosclerosis? Well, I just told you, LDL. This is Heinz-Nixdorf study, an excellent study out of Germany. And we see that they measured the calcification of a whole load of people from very low, no heart disease, up to super high, massive heart disease. But you can see the LDL of the people didn't even correlate. These two guys here, one has massive heart disease, one has almost none, and they have the same LDL pretty much, right? So again, this illustrates how useless LDL is in deciding anything. In the same study, what did they see that predicted the risk? Well, of course, type 2 diabetes up and to the right, and blood pressure, which links to type 2 diabetes. Hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance, big dog in town, and it's undiagnosed type 2 diabetes. So, longest running heart study ever, Framingham, started in 1948, the town of Framingham, Massachusetts. And it's going on to this day. It's multi-generation. But their director, William P. Castelli, back in '96, in a published paper, which I found, said unless the LDL levels are very high, above 300 milligrams, that's just LDL, 300 milligrams or higher, they have no value in isolation in predicting who's at risk for coronary heart disease. And he also said that the total over HDL ratio, or it would be similar to the triglyceride over HDL ratio, was a better predictor than any of the other measures, not only in Framingham, but also in Physicians' Health Study and many other studies. And we see that to this day, 30 years of studies, it's all, excuse me, always the same answer, right? The LDL is the dunce of the class. And the reason, simply put, it's not the whole reason, is that insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia are a massive driver of cardiovascular disease issues, but these states also decrease your HDL and increase your small dense LDL. So the LDL and cholesterol metrics they're hitching a ride on the back of the real causes, right? They're getting a correlation they didn't earn, and that's the problem. One last one on this. If you go into the world's risk calculators, these algorithms, there's 5 of them around the world, and they are used to make medication decisions for life. So these risk algorithms are a big deal, right? They decide whether you get medication for the rest of your life or not based on your cardiac risk over 10 years. So let's say we took a 50-year-old male, right, with cholesterol over 300 and LDL over 190. That's huge. If the average doctor saw that, they'd have a bit of a panic attack on your behalf. And they would say you're a super high risk person. And in fact, in the guidelines, if you're over 190 now, that's automatic statin regardless of anything else, okay, in the latest guidelines. But if we put in this guy into the world's risk algorithms, let's see what happens when we also put in other numbers for him that say he's not insulin resistant, okay? We put in no type 2 diabetes. We put in no hypertension. We put in the other metrics to say he hasn't got the real root causes. What result do we get? Well, in 3 of the biggest around the world, he comes out as low risk with that 190 LDL. Low risk, would not be medicated. And if the person was smart enough to get a calcium scan at middle age and got a 0, which many of them will, then in the other algorithms which use the scan, this person will be ultra low risk. You can't be below 1 or 2% risk. It's essentially 0. So you can see that that 190 LDL person in their algorithms, right, not mine, all over the world, once you put in the numbers to make that person not insulin resistant, the person is low risk across all the algorithms. And that gives you the final answer, right, using their algorithms. The same people who say LDL is a killer. So if you focus on the wrong problem, you might miss the obvious solution, like this poor kitty here. Doesn't really realize there's no top on the cage. So what's the issue for decades? All the media, all the doctors, all the scientists, all the nutters like Ansel Keys, and basically all of the pharmaceutical companies as well, they're all staring at cholesterol, right? It's a cash cow. It's a gold mine. Everyone knows about it. Easy stuff. Get your cholesterol lower. But what they're missing is the elephant in the room, as I've described to you. And that's hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance, high blood glucose, and spikes after a meal, right? Not the only problem, but it's the big one. An engineering world I'm in, we focus on the big guys first and we fix them. Then we move on to the smaller. So I won't go through it here, but just to show you my list of the primary problems driving cardiovascular disease, and also Alzheimer's, and also many of the cancers too, like endometrial and other cancers are very glucose and insulin sensitive. This is the list of drivers. And I can't even put LDL on there because it just can't make the grade, okay? But again, the big one is up the top, as always. Last study, and this is unusual, and I've showed it a couple of times before over many years, but not too often. And what I always wanted to do was pull together all the studies into one compilation and put LDL up against insulin, glucose, and HDL in one shooting match from all the research. And when I discovered this paper in 2014, this team, mathematical and medical team, did it. They did the job for me. And they basically looked at all the trials of the last 30, 40 years, and they put everything head to head. And they asked what percentage of heart attacks could be prevented if you addressed these different things early on when people were around 20 or 30 years old. And what came out was hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance would reduce or prevent 42% of all the heart attacks. So it was the biggie, as I've told you. But they also showed that systolic blood pressure, HDL cholesterol being low, and BMI were also really heavy hitters if you fix them. But what the team didn't realize is that blood pressure, HDL low, and BMI are all intimately related to hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance. So really, hyperinsulin, insulin resistance kind of owns this whole box, which when you add it up is nearly everything. And the little dribble left for LDL, well, a lot of LDL being high correlating to heart disease is related to insulin-related factors in any case. So basically, there's no match, right? No match whatsoever. LDL falls off the map. And the last one, Colombian study with second heart attacks, just to hammer the point home, They tracked these guys who had a heart attack for 7 years, and they looked at what predicts a second heart attack. What are the real risk factors? And total and LDL cholesterol measured at the start, they were 1. No predictive power, whether you were high or low, no prediction of the second heart attack whatsoever. They were useless. Hypertension or higher blood pressure doubled your risk to have a second heart attack. And insulin, high insulin, which is very seldom measured, it was 7 times predictor almost of having a second heart attack. And the team at the end of the paper scratched their head and said, I think we're missing the elephant in the room here, because no one's really looking at insulin in anyone, never mind in someone who already had a heart attack. And they're not looking at insulin. They're looking at cholesterol. The idiots. And I'm going to skip this one actually because a little bit complicated, and I think I've beaten this to death possibly at this point. But suffice it to say that when you have high LDL giving you a worse outcome or worse survival for heart disease or all-cause mortality, it's not the high LDL. You can see high up here is fine and high LDL is bad down here. But in this case, this study showed it depends on your iron loading. And you'll also see it depends on your insulin resistance. And the point is, when high LDL indicates a bad thing, it's always some other thing that's a real root cause. It's never the high LDL. So beyond epidemic, and now we get to the reality in the USA, because I have USA figures, and in this case, I'm talking to USA people, so that's relevant. Recent surveys from National Institutes of Health and Nutrition survey, 64% of US adults over 45 years of age are now officially pre-diabetic or diabetic, okay? Now you can call them pre-diabetic, diabetic, insulin-resistant, hyperinsulinemic, metabolic syndrome, cardiometabolic syndrome, diabetes in situ, you know, there's loads of words for this, but that's just confusing the issue. They're all essentially diabetic. And Dr. Gerber and myself and many other professionals and doctors in the US who are informed would say it's probably 75% if you measure their insulin. So it's catastrophic. 3/4 of your population over 45 now share one common disease state that drives most heart attacks. Go figure. And I'll mention Dr. Joseph Kraft, a friend of mine who died at 95 a couple of years ago. But myself and Dr. Gerber interviewed him in, oh God, I'm not sure when it was now, it was 16 or 17. And it was in the Trump Tower in Chicago. And we interviewed him before he died. And he gave a great interview, which is on the web. But he did 15,000 insulin assays in the 1970s. He was the first person to do high volume insulin post-glucose tests. And he discovered something profound and wrote a book about it. And he basically discovered that diabetes type 2 is vastly bigger than we think. Because with his advanced tests, he could find diabetics in vast numbers in people who had not failed a standard diabetes test. And because he was a professor of pathology also and a pathologist, he did the research and realized that most heart disease is due to vasculitis and vascular damage from high insulin, high glucose states. So it was incredible work, but he was never recognized. And he had a phrase, which is not completely true, but it's a powerful quote. Those with cardiovascular disease not identified with diabetes are simply undiagnosed. Now, we know there are special causes for heart disease now, but in general, he's correct. If you think someone has heart disease and they're not diabetic, give them a post-glucose insulin assay over 5 hours. And you may find out, like Dr. Arthur Agustin recently found out through myself, all those people he thought were non-diabetic and couldn't figure out why they had advanced atherosclerosis at a young age. Well, the thing was he was never using a post-meal insulin. And that's what sorts out the wheat from the chaff. So, disease, heart disease, and diabetes, how closely are they related? Well, this Eurospire study is stunning, and no one knows about it. They surveyed all coronary disease patients in Europe. Aged 18 to 80, they took a random sample of all of them, all ages, and it was across 24 European countries. So you can imagine this is a perfect poll to see what goes on in heart disease victims of all ages, all countries. and they looked closely at their blood glucose, much closer than your doctor would. But what they found out without doing anything was, wow, a third of these guys are already registered type 2 diabetics from the get-go. Like a third of them, which is vastly higher than the percentage of diabetics in Europe. So, whoa, type 2 diabetes is huge. But when they looked close at their glucose, they found out another quarter were full-blown type 2 diabetics, undiagnosed. And because they were looking closely at the glucose measures, they were able to see that another quarter were high risk for type 2 diabetes, which is type 2 diabetes. They were just being nice. And the remainder, they didn't insulin test them. So as I mentioned, without an insulin test, you're going to miss a lot of guys. So God knows how many more there were in here if you insulin test them. In other words, the vast majority of heart attack patients of all ages are essentially type 2 diabetic. So Eurospire in 2015 finally put the stamp on this. Undiagnosed type 2 diabetes, it's enormous, and it's not really being talked about. Not enough. So I explained in Denver in 19 last year, I kind of went through why the LDL particles can be part of the problem. And I explained that the LDLs in your blood, they're not inherently bad, but even if you're to say they can become involved in the problem, there's multiple layers that allow them to become problematic. And guess what? Every single layer in whether it will let LDLs become a problem or not, that's governed or mediated or decided by the real root causes on my list. So even when you allow that LDL can get into the wall and be problematic, the only reason it ever would is because of the root causes on my list. So that's just another thing to remember. So back to fat, and we'll finish off with fat, I think. So how did Dr. Kraft fix these guys way back in 1972? So he was obviously a genius. He worked out the diabetes, and he'd worked out what was driving most vascular disease. But he wanted to help his patients too, so he quietly put them on certain diets. So here's one patient, 1972, December, and here's the terrible insulin spike that Dr. Kraft saw that they were diabetic, right? And then in a few months, he got this lovely low insulin, which is non-diabetic. How did he do it? With low carb, high fat diets. And you can see there, look, 73, low carbohydrate management response. So let's say this guy was ahead of his time, right? And we're going to fly through a few papers to illustrate. Here's one from Volek. Volek and Finney have done incredible work. And in this paper, they pull together all the data and they make a point that's fundamental. Low-fat diets were intended to address or target LDL. They were going after LDL, which we know now is a junk biomarker, but that's what they were intended for. Does targeting LDL address the root causes of heart disease, the primary ones? And the answer is no. And that's why the whole thing has been a pantomime, to be quite honest. Volek points out that all the real measures of risk, right, the important ones, and I won't read them out, well, a keto and low carb diet in all the literature targets all of these, right? Nearly every one of them is targeted in a positive way. Now that targets the real root causes, right? It's basic stuff. Virta has done incredible work over the last couple of years. Many of you are familiar, I'm sure. They've taken type 2 diabetics, several hundred, and tracked and only implemented a keto, low-carb, high-fat diet. And they've given an app and support, but no calorie restriction. And in a year alone, they had 12% weight loss, but that's not the important thing. They had a major shift in HbA1c. They had 94% of them decreased or eliminated insulin dosage, and they had 60% technically become non-diabetic by the blood glucose measures. And this for a disease that's said to be chronically progressive and will keep getting worse without any question. That's the dogma. And look what they did. That's addressing root causes with high-fat diet. This one here, again from Volek, and recent ketogenic diet in military personnel. They gave half the people a keto diet, no calorie control, but good advice and good coaching on meals, etc., so they could do it properly. They got 18-pound weight loss, 5% body fat reduction, and they got nearly 50% reduction in visceral fat, the intra-organal fat in your organs. That's the real risk, nearly a 50% reduction relatively with the keto diet versus standard chow. And they got a 30% reduction in insulin resistance metrics, which is huge. That's addressing the real root causes of heart disease. ApoE4, some of you will have heard of, the ancestral genotype, 17% of people who are more susceptible to heart disease and certainly Alzheimer's. And all of my family are ApoE4, so I got a vested interest here. Well, I got this poor middle-aged guy. He had insulin-resistant dyslipidemia, kind of bad cholesterol ratios, and brain fog, early Alzheimer's-like symptoms. So they said, let's give him a kick-ass keto diet and see what we can do for this poor chap. Well, they dropped his HOMA insulin resistance and his fasting insulin by nearly 90% in a few months. They dropped his triglyceride over HDL down by over 50%. His A1C came down 30% and he became a non-diabetic or a remission or regressed diabetic. And his MoCA cognitive score, the world standard measurement of mental acuity used to measure if people have brain fog or Alzheimer's problems, went up 26%. That's actually a huge increase, and this would be unheard of. And they did it all with a low carb, very high fat diet, right? That's addressing the problem. So I think that's the last one, but hopefully it illustrates in a fairly simple way. The literature is with us, the science is with us. You shouldn't overeat fats and oils, that's not a good idea, but a low carb, high fat, real foods diet addresses the causes of modern chronic disease like almost nothing else, right? And everything we were told for prior decades is junk science. So I'll just finish off we have a new movie out a few months ago, and it'd be great if you could watch it. It actually covers the calcium score, and we scanned 45 middle-aged, 58-year-old men who are sporting heroes from Ireland. And you can read there, we had cardiologists in the making of the movie. We scanned 45, we discovered around 7 or 8 massive disease people who their doctors the day before thought they were in great shape. And one of our heroes, Paddy O'Rourke, the captain, went for a year and followed what we would do. He went low carb, he took all the right vitamins and minerals, and he did all the right stuff. And let's just say when we scanned him again at the end of the movie, let's just say we were very, very happy. So the movie ends on a good note. So there you have it. And with that, I think I'm going to Q&A. So I'll just stop sharing. And if you give me a moment, it's a bit frozen here. Ask a question. Okay. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Oh, very good. So where do I answer them? In the chat box? Gotcha. What age? Okay. Do I need to type this, Andy, or just say it?
No, you can just say it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So the age recommended, we always stick with the recommendations. We don't want to do any funny stuff. So the age is kind of 40 to 45 for males and around 50 to 55 for females. So there is a difference. Women generally have heart disease acceleration 10 years later than men. So let's say 40 for men, 50 for women is the broad guideline. And younger if you have a significant extra concern, like a family history or a father or mother that died very young, they might say at 3 or 4 or 5. But generally 40 men, 50 women, and middle risk people. So most people in those algorithms I showed you, they're mostly middle risk people, which is absurd because no one knows what's going on unless you scan them. What's middle risk mean? So yeah, it's a great idea. If you have a CAC score of 1 or higher, is it possible to lower? We do have cases of people who lower their score, but the important thing with calcium is to remember, even if you have a high score, it's like a scar. So if you've got a score of 1,000 today, that's your history. You built up a lot of calcium to strengthen your arteries because they were inflamed. You're at 1,000. If you keep living the way you're living and change nothing, it's going to go up to like 1,200 next year or 1,400 the year after, and it's going to be going up and up, and you got massive risk of a heart attack. But today, if you do something and you fix the root causes, What we see happening is it may only go up to 1,050. So it may only go up 5% next year and only 5% the following year. And if it goes up only 5 or 10% per year, that's actually excellent. And your degree of risk plummets down, almost like a low scoring guy, just by slowing it, certainly by stopping it. And some people, it appears, it reverses a little and some of the calcium leaches back out once you stop the root causes driving the process forward. Sometimes calcium appears to leach out. People love that result. It feels great, but you shouldn't need to aim for that. Just know what their score is and slow it down or stop it progressing. That's the magic. Oh, there's a large scale. 1 to 100 is a bracket. Yeah, to be honest, there is noise. Even though it's an amazing predictor, there is noise in the machine. Your heart is beating and moving, and the machine has to strobe really fast. So, you know, if your heart's beating faster or slower, you can get different results. It sees different amounts of white. So there's noise in the number. So they generally look at 0 is, okay, 0 score. That's a category. And 1 to 100 within the noise of low scores, it's broadly, okay, you've got some disease. You've got evidence of disease, you know, category. But I agree in the future they may, with the new machines, start splitting that in smaller categories and the risk will still remain proportionate. That's the way they do it. Oh, am I safe to assume a score of 14, 0 on 3 or 4, I'm still pretty rock solid? Yeah, well, in your 60s, a score of 14 is actually less than an average person. It's probably better than an average person. Once you get to your 60s, you start seeing calcification all over the place. Now you do get, I have a 76-year-old with a 0, right? It's quite unusual. And I've got a 29-year-old in America with a score of 600 with the arteries of an 85-year-old. So you only know when you measure, but 14 is not high for a 60s guy. And as you get older, having a higher score kind of like is part of aging. But you can always, of course, stop it progressing and greatly reduce your risk once you know something's going on. What's the best way to lower triglycerides? Usually your classic low carb or keto diet is the intervention for triglycerides, and usually it works. There are some very rare people. By the way, I wouldn't worry about 103, to be honest. I wouldn't get too anal. Most Americans are walking around around 150 or 200 or much higher. You know, if it's around 100, I wouldn't worry too much. And if your HDL is high, your ratio is going to be good. But low carb, keto, there's rumors as well, or talk from Dave Feldman on Cholesterol Code, that sometimes when people drink coffee when they're meant to be doing a fasted test, you know, they can get a higher score than it would have been in triglycerides. And also, if you don't do a full 12 or 13 hours proper fast, you can, if you go in at 10 hours, you can get actually a higher triglyceride. So there's a few pitfalls. You can get a higher trig really than you should get. And there are some people, very rare, who a low carb, high fat diet doesn't seem to help with the trigs and they stay high. And that's a gray area, to be honest. Primary care be able to perform CAC? Won't perform it, but he will write a letter if you need one in the state you're in. He'll give permission for you to go to a scanning clinic or a hospital and get the scan. But the scan is done on a CT scanner in a clinic or a hospital setting. So yeah, and let me see, is it possible to order the CAC? I think so, but states vary. Some states are walk-in. If you Google your local area, you might find a clinic, scanning clinic, they've got the CT for this, and you literally walk in or ring them and make an appointment with no primary care. It depends on the state. Best glucose numbers to look for in a glucose. I would say with a glucose test, you know, your milligrams, so you want to be kind of nominally below 100. Some low carbers, like Sean Baker, who's here later, runs a high glucose. I sometimes run a high fasting glucose. And that's just when you're eating really low carb. Some people's physiology, you know, your glucagon goes up, your fat burning, and your liver is producing plenty of glucose, you know, because that's being used by your brain. And some people seem to run a surprisingly high fasting glucose when they're actually on low carb, low insulin, low, you know, they're very healthy. So it's tricky, the blood glucose. If you're eating pizzas, drinking Coca-Cola, you know, a crappy diet, and you've got high blood glucose, it's a really bad sign. But if you're super healthy, fit, athletic, and all your stuff is good and your insulin is low, you may run a higher glucose than you'd like, but it's not a problem. And the best glucose test is to measure around an hour or two after a meal. So, you know, you don't want to be over 120, 125. So even someone who's running like a little high fasting, the healthy guys, if they eat a healthy meal, you'll find it won't go up much after the meal. That's the real measure. Is there such thing as eating too much fat? There's such thing as eating too much anything, but I won't get vulgar. So, yeah, I mean, Ted Naiman, Dr. Naiman, many of you may know, is a great person to try and clarify this. Stuffing in sticks of butter, it's kind of like a liquid fat. I know it's solid, but it's just a fat. And taking oils, like loads of coconut oils, they're bringing in a lot of energy with very little nutrients. So really you should be taking your high fat in fatty ribeye steaks, fatty fish, real food. But the idea that you can horse in a load of extra fat to chase ketosis, I don't agree with that. And Ted makes a great point that we described in Eat Rich, Live Long as well. And maybe this is the last point if I'm running out of time. You know, if you are on a weight loss plateau where you're dropping weight and it stops falling, particularly postmenopausal women and certain people, they come down from, say, I don't know, 300 pounds to around 240, and then it won't come off. What you need to do then is the protein sparing modified fast. So what you actually do is you keep your carb and your protein the same, and you actually pull back on your fat content. And you are calorie restricting and you're forcing your body fat to burn. So it's not always a good idea to just keep lots of fat coming in. I think of it as lower the carb, keep the protein high for satiety and for nutrition, and let the fat fill in the background. That's kind of the way I do it. And do a lot of meal skipping and fasting, right? That's fantastic stuff to be doing, mixed with a low carb diet. Sorry, Andy, you came on. Are we running tight or?
Yes, yeah, we're actually out of time.
Oh, okay.
So that's why I came on. I didn't mean to interrupt, but that was fantastic. Ivor, thank you so much. Everybody else, stick around. We will be back in 8 minutes with Eric Westman. And big round for, virtual round for Ivor Cummins. Thanks so much, Ivor.
Good luck, Andy. Good luck, Vinny. Bye now. Anytime. Bye.
Bye.